Hello, history nerds and historians. My name is Krystina, and this is Effed Up Mythology. This is where we talk about a little tidbit from mythology that's super fucked up. Although aspects are fucked up all around this person, because this mythological figure herself is amazing. I would do many things with her and to her. I would honestly consider leaving my husband for Atalanta. I love her so much. Anyway, today we're talking about Atalanta, who is a BAMF. And what other time to talk about Atalanta the BAMF than for International Women's Day, which is on March 8th. Trigger warning before we begin. Talk of child abandonment, sexual assault, war, murder. I would say visiting the Oracle, but I honestly don't hate the Oracle in this myth. So instead, the trigger warning will be my massive existential crisis that I experience. Also, a brief discussion of death of a child, and that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's talk about my fantasy wife, Atalanta. Sit back, relax, and practice your, oh good God, what the fuck faces. So depending on what version you read, Atalanta was either born in Arcadia to Iasus and Clymene, or from Boeotia, and was the daughter of a man named King Sconius. I'm sorry in advance for the actual absolute butchering of these names. I don't speak Greek, so I'm going to do my best. So King Sconius, regardless of her parents and who they weren't in her life for long. When she was born, her father desperately wanted a son, and he was so distraught over not being given a son that he left Atalanta on the mountainside to die of exposure, because of fucking course he did. As she was crying, a mother bear whose cubs had just been murdered by some hunters found her and nursed her. After a while, these same hunters that killed the cubs found Mama Bear and saw her suckling Atalanta and recognized that it must have been Artemis's doing, because one of her sacred animals was the bear. So the two hunters took pity on the infant and brought her to the mountain and raised her together, worshiping Artemis. Now, sources that I read says that it was hunters. There wasn't any specification that either of them were female. And with it being Greek mythology, you know that they would have specified if a woman was involved. So I think that Atalanta was raised by two dads, which I love. Obviously, this is not confirmed, but in my head, it is confirmed. The hunters raised her like a little Artemis. She was a huntress, she was virginal, and she was badass. It was also said that she was the fastest woman in the world. So she would venture through the forest by herself, armed with her bow. She would stalk through the forest like a silent lion, waiting for the attack, wearing a simple sleeveless tunic that stopped at her knees. One day, she was in the forest when two centaurs known as Rhecus and Hylios saw her and were just beside themselves with how beautiful she was and how confident she was. Now, centaurs, for any of you who don't know, are those half horse, half man creatures. They were known to be very violent, especially towards women. So many of the stories that involve centaurs and women end up with the women getting sexually assaulted. So for any Harry Potter fans, there are a lot of people who think that that's what happened to Dolores Umbridge, and that's why she's so traumatized by simply hearing Ron pretend to make horse sounds at the end of Order of the Phoenix. It doesn't redeem her character, but it is the sort of tragic thing for her that is implied. Also, why would you have a school so close to where that is a possibility and then send small children there for detention, one of those children being a female? I have questions, J.K. Rowling, and 99% of them are about how you just being a garbage person. But this is one of the questions that is included in the other 1% that I need to know, but I will not ask you because, again, you are a garbage person. So with that in mind, the two centaurs started stalking and hurting Atalanta, and she most likely had a pretty good idea where this was heading. So there was a moment for her to decide. Would she become another statistic, another victim of a brutal and violent crime that so many women were subjected to during this time, where every story seems to have an unfortunate mention in passing of what happened to these women? would she become just another name in a hero's story when he slayed the centaur, saying something like, warrior Otis killed Ricus, who once took Atalanta by force? Or would this be the beginning of her hero's story, or rather heroine's story? So she knocked her arrow and she slew the 2 centaurs. Word traveled. Centaurs are hard to kill. And Atalanta, a woman, a girl at this point, killed 2 by herself in the middle of the woods. This girl was blessed by Artemis, and she would amount to many great things. So, as most heroes do, in this case, heroine, she went to the Oracle, which, I mean, many of you know how I feel about the Oracle. If you knew, I don't like her. She typically talks in riddles and doesn't tell people what they actually need to know. And in giving her prophecy, she's typically bringing about the demise of whoever is involved. If it's not the right, like, outright demise, then it's at least suffering. See Oedipus, Antigone, Cupid and Psyche, Medea. Those are just episodes that I have done, and the list just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. But, it pains me so much to say, and perhaps I can let it slide because this is Atalanta we're talking about. We've established my very strong feelings for her. But when Atalanta went to the Oracle, it didn't turn out terribly for her. I'm not mad at it. I'm questioning everything. I'm having like an existential crisis because who am I if not hater of the Oracle, right? So, like I said, word starts getting out that Atalanta is a BAMF, and all of the men in the area were like, this is a woman that I want at my side. And I agree. I would also like her at my side, and all of these men should back off immediately because although I am not a skilled warrior, I do have a certain set of skills. So when Atalanta went to the Oracle, she asked the Oracle like what she should do about the whole marriage thing. And the Oracle said nothing. You don't need to do anything. You are a strong, beautiful, independent woman, and you do not need a husband. In fact, I think that you should shun marriage altogether. Fuck that noise. Most men are terrible, and most men will suppress you so much. They would seek to put you in a box. To be the man who bested Atalanta, to be the man who tamed the huntress. You will live, but you will lose yourself. And although I say most men are terrible, obviously nowadays that's not necessarily the case anymore. Most men are actually really great nowadays, and it's the minority that are terrible nowadays. But back then, during Greek mythology, there was just insane misogyny. There was just an insane lack of respect for women. If you can't tell, in mythology, women were essentially property. They couldn't really be educated. They couldn't vote. They couldn't do anything. They were so suppressed. They were literally just like walking wombs. And so when you entered a marriage, pretty much anything that you did beforehand was just completely eradicated. And it was just believed that you would give this man sons and you would be the vessel in which his line continued. And that was pretty much your only purpose. So that's why I say like men were terrible. That's what the Oracle was saying during that time period. Nowadays, I love men. They're great. Super cool. I don't love them as much as I love Atalanta, but they're super cool. I like a man who can speak the truth and who respects women. But all of these like single white men podcasts, like those can go away, but the other men are fine. And this whole idea that the Oracle told Atalanta that she would lose herself, I think, like, honestly, anyone who gets married or enters a serious long-term relationship, and like has a kid or has multiple kids, I feel like that's something that you can really relate to. Like, I know I can. My son is 3.5 and I'm just now starting to sort of like remember who I am outside of wife and mother. So Atalanta, hearing this from the Oracle, was terrified by this thought. And she went back into the woods and she avoided male attention altogether if she could. She avoided the male gaze. Really, if she could, she just like retreated back into the forest. But then one day, she heard news that Jason was gathering an army. So he had been sent on this quest to obtain the Golden Fleece. Heroes from all over were answering the call, like Heracles and Orpheus and Peleus, father of Achilles, Canis, Castor and Pollux, Meleager, Nestor, Theseus, all of these like really big heroic names, people who have stories in their own rights, people who are remembered, and Atalanta wanted to be one of them. So she traveled to where Jason was building up his force, the Argonauts, as they were called, and she joined them. She was the only woman on board with a group of heroes who were world renowned for their bravery and strength, and she was in their midst. And most of them actually respected her, and some of them maybe even fell in love with her a little bit. But she didn't take a lover. She shirked all of the advances. She was a warrior in her own right, and she would prove it. Now, unfortunately, all of the sources here don't really talk much about her and her time with Jason. She is a background character of a much bigger story, which is the story of Jason and Medea. I have a whole episode about that. If you haven't listened to it, stop this episode now and do that, because spoilers are incoming. But also it's my favorite myth. Because I guess I'm just like a terrible person and I look for any excuse to talk about Medea that I can. Honestly, I think that Medea is my favorite myth because it kind of reminds me of like a mythological true crime case. Even though Medea is awful, I find her fascinating and like tragic, kind of like how my favorite serial killer is Eileen Wuornos. And don't look at me like that as I say favorite serial killer, because everyone who is into true crime has a favorite true crime case and they have a favorite serial killer. Okay. So brief recap of Medea, because I can, and because I like to think that although Atalanta is a background mythological character in this story, if Jason and Medea were to actually have existed, right? And all of the stories in the myth of Jason and Medea were to have actually have happened, and Atalanta were to have existed with this thought process, I think she would have been there for everything that happened during that myth, because I just got finished reading ACOTAR, the whole series of ACOTAR, Court of Thorns and Roses, and they repeat over and over again, like calls to like calls to like. And I think that like does call to like, because Medea, a badass bitch, would recognize and gravitate towards other badass bitches. And who is the baddest bitch of them all, but the only woman amongst the greatest warriors of all time, Atalanta. So, recap. Jason's father, Aeson, had his throne usurped by his brother Peleus, not the father of Achilles, it's a different Peleus. And then he went to an oracle who told him, one day the one-sandaled man would come and he would be a descendant of Aeolus and he will kill you, Peleus. And sure enough, one day here comes the one-sandaled man named Jason, and he wants his father's throne back and is told he has to go get the golden fleece and break a curse, and then Peleus will just hand it over to him. So Jason gathers the argonauts. That's what they come to be called because he has a boat called the Argo, and therefore the people are the Argonauts. And then that's when Atalanta comes in and is like, hey, I heard there were some badass bitches that were ready to fight. It's me. I'm badass bitches. And like, that's so interesting to me because this whole idea of women being bad luck on board is not something that's like exclusive to the universe of Pirates of the Caribbean. So the fact that she joined is amazing. Also amazing is that Canis is on board, who is one of the first trans mythological characters. You have like the Babylonian Iphis, which I did an episode on, and then you have Canis, who was born a woman, and then she was sexually assaulted by Poseidon. And he was like, oh man, I kind of feel a little bit bad about that. Can I do anything to like make it up to you? And Canis was like, yeah, you can make me into a man so this never fucking happens to me again, because being a woman in goddamn fucking mythological Greece fucking sucks, and I also don't want to get pregnant because that would also fucking suck. And Poseidon was like, yeah, fam, I feel ya. And then he changed Canis into a man, and then he became this amazing warrior. And like even some of the guys on the ship are really, really good guys, like Meleager, who we'll talk about in a little bit. I love Meleager. So Jason and the Argonauts make their way to Colchis, so Atalanta is there. She's mentioned again after they complete the tasks on Colchis and get to the Golden Fleece as they're fighting their way out. She does get injured and is healed by Medea on the ship as they're fleeing, which means Atalanta is there watching as Medea is like, oh no, my father is following us. It would be a shame if something were to distract him. Something like gathering all the parts of his son so that the funerary rites can be completed properly to get him to the underworld. And oops, I killed my brother and cut him into pieces and casually tossed him into the ocean. Whatever am I to do? Oh no! Then all of the Argonauts make their way to Circe's island, which means that Atalanta is there when Jason and Medea get purified by Circe. And then all of the Argonauts go back to Iolcus, where they come up with a plan to infiltrate the city, which, depending on what version you read, it's either with Medea disguised as an old woman or just Medea being this jilted bride who's gotten into a fight with her terrible new husband. But both times she's accompanied by handmaidens. What women are nearby? that know who Medea is, who know what she's planning to do and would be okay with it because it's all in the name of war and their job as a warrior. What woman would accompany her and probably protect her because they're badass warrior bitches? That's right. I think fucking Atalanta was one of these handmaidens that accompanied Medea and most likely vowed to protect her, like fucking Brienne of Tarth, which means that if this is the case, Atalanta is there when Medea murders Peleus and then when the Argonauts flee Iolcus. Now, at this point, she may have left. She may have ran away from Medea and Jason, or maybe she accompanied them to Corinth and was there as Medea and Jason started their family. And then when Jason decided that he wanted to start a family with someone else, because that's just something that you do apparently. And then maybe Atalanta was one of the servants or soldiers who stood by Jason and Medea. Maybe Atalanta was there when Glauce and Creon burned to death by Medea's spell. Maybe she was there when Medea did what she did to her children. I don't know. She's not mentioned, like I said, but honestly, none of the servants and soldiers are named. So most of the time, it's just kind of like assume it's just a random person. So in my world, Atalanta is there for the whole thing. And after everything that happened, I think that this would just confirm for Atalanta what the Oracle said such a long time ago, that when you get married, you lose yourself. Because Medea, when she got married, lost herself. Before that, she was selfless and strong and amazing. And then she met Jason and just day by day became more and more obsessed and frantic to keep his love. So much so that it ended up with her going insane and murdering the two most important people in her life, her children, just to try and get back at him. The Medea that you meet in Colchis that helped with the 3 tasks, knowing that if her father were to find out that she was helping, would kill her, looks at her father like a monster for having those thoughts of killing his children and making those threats, and then she becomes the same. She becomes a child murderer. No. If I was in Atalanta and I witnessed all of this, it would confirm for me that I would never want to get married and I would run as far away from it as I could. So then now as the whole Medea thing is ending, Enos, king of Calydon, has gone and pissed off Artemis. It was an especially great harvest season, and Enos and his people made their offerings and sacrifices to the gods and goddesses. But in his haste or his excitement, he forgot Artemis. And although Artemis isn't a goddess that's renowned for her wrath in myths, she still fought vengeance for this dishonor and this insult. So she sent a boar to Calydon. A boar so big that it rivaled the biggest bulls in all of Greece. His eyes glittered with fire and blood. His tusks were as big as an elephant's. His mouth was full of lightning and his breath scorched the trees. He ate everything in sight, the grapevines, the olive trees, the fruit trees. He became enraged and slaughtered the livestock. No man, no hound, no bull can fight him off. He was sent to make the farmers suffer, to make sure that there was never a good harvest again, that if Artemis was not honored, there would never be anything to honor the gods for ever again. So a call is sent out and answered by some of the greatest warriors in the land, some of them being those who were on the Argo, and they were all led by Meleager. I mentioned him in passing when I was listing some of the notable Argonauts, and I mentioned that I loved him. He's honestly mostly notable for this story. When he's on the Argo, he's not really well known at that point. He's just the Prince of Calydon. But with this story, this is where he, really builds up his mythology and his heroic story. Meleager was a son of a woman named Althea. One night she slept with her husband Enos, king of Calydon, who, the one who forgot to honor Artemis, and also Ares, god of war. Now, ancient Greece didn't really understand how the female reproductive system worked, and that even if a woman were to have sex with 10 people in one night, only one of them would get her pregnant. The Greeks in this mythological time period believed that at times, if someone were to have sex with 2 people in one night, especially if one of those individuals was a deity, the child that resulted from these unions could have qualities of both. So Meleager was a fierce warrior with a temper from Ares, and I don't know what he got from Enos. Maybe he was forgetful. I don't know, but yeah. So he was son of Ares and Enos. However, there was something interesting about Meleager other than his 2 dads. The moment that he was born, maybe perhaps because of his descendancy from Ares, the 3 fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, appeared before his mother. Clothos told Althea that Meleager would be noble. Lachesis told her that he would be brave. And then, fucking Maleficent, not invited to the party, Atropos looked at Althea and then picked up a single log sitting in the fireplace, whispered to Althea that he would live until this log turned to ash, and then she yeeted it into the fireplace and disappeared. So the moment the Fates disappeared, Althea jumped out of bed, snatched the log out of the fireplace with her bare hands, extinguished it, and hid it deep within the castle where no flame could ever get to it. So Meleager would be noble, brave, and fate attached entirely to a piece of wood, but it was hidden and nothing could ever get to it, so he would live forever, right? Right? So like I said, Meleager was leading the band of warriors who were set to hunt down the boar, and one of those warriors was Atalanta. But of course it was Atalanta because, I mean, first off, having a virgin huntress on board when you're trying to make Artemis happy is probably a good call, but more so, Meleager fell in love with Atalanta the moment he saw her for the first time. He stood beside her on the Argo and would stand beside her in the boar hunt and would stand beside her forever if she allowed him to. But he mostly kept this love to himself, whether it was because he knew of the prophecy somehow, or maybe it was because he was so caught up with everything between the Argonaut thing and the boar hunt, or maybe he was just playing the long game and was hoping like, I'll just get really close to her because, you know, the best relationships develop out of friendships, right? So one day all these people are out in the woods looking for the boar and they find it, or rather like the boar finds them. It starts ripping through the men, the hounds that they brought, the very trees themselves. Every arrow fired and spear thrown misses its mark. Artemis is said to like be interfering at every opportunity. At one point, one man is actually able to make contact with the boar with his spear, but as the spear is in the air, Artemis grabs it, rips the iron tip off and lets it keep going. So the boar essentially just gets like poked by a dull stick, and the boar starts just taking out the warriors one by one. The boar starts to retreat into the thick-wooded forest when Atalanta knocks her bow, takes a steadying breath, and fires. And Artemis, who loves Atalanta so much, doesn't interfere this time. The arrow grazes along the boar's back and embeds itself into its ear. Atalanta is not satisfied, but Meleager witnesses this entire thing and screams out like, "Oh, hell yeah! Did y'all fucking see that? Atalanta, holy shit, that was awesome!" Everyone is going to know that you were the one who drew first blood. Everyone is going to know that you were able to fire this first thing, that we were able to take the boar down because of you. Did you all fucking see that? I am so turned on right now. This pisses off of every other man, because not only did she draw first blood and sort of like emasculated these men that were there, but Meleager has the audacity to be a feminist. So one of the men, who was named Ancaeus from Arcadia, calls out to the men to watch him. He's like, "It's time that you all learned that no woman will ever match a man with a weapon, and I will show you how a man wields a weapon." So he takes his giant double-edged axe and he holds it over his head, readying himself to give the killing blow to this boar, and gets tusked in the balls, which happens to disembowel him also, but it kills him like immediately. But the balls part is just like chef's kiss, so poetic, you know? So a lot of the men, after seeing this, back away a little or try to be a little bit more cautious about how they approach this bull, except for Atalanta and Meleager. They both continue on. Meleager picks up 2 spears. The first misses and the second finds its target. Artemis lets it find its target. This weakens the beast enough for Meleager to end the blight on Calydon. So Meleager gets to work and he skins it and turns to Atalanta and asks her to share this trophy with him. Share this victory with me. Share this glory with me. And he presents the boar's hide and its tusks. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone could give her. It delights her, and it brings so much joy to Meleager to give this gift to her and share this honor and just see like how happy he's making her by doing this and by honoring her as a woman, but also as a fierce warrior, not belittling her or taking away anything from her. Other men standing by do not feel the same. They are envious and also pissed and do the exact opposite. So Meleager's 2 uncles on his mother's side, named Toxius and Plexippus, step forward and are like, "Oh, so romantic. Okay, well, we all know that she's very pretty, Meleager. We all know that. But let's be real. She doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve this. If you don't want the hide and the tusks as Prince of Calydon, then it's your right, but it should go to us as uncles of the Prince of Calydon, because that's totally a thing with inheritance. It shouldn't go to this woman, even though she was the one who, like, you know, fired the first shot. But it doesn't matter. Leave it to the men, sweetheart. And they rip the hides and the tusks out of Atalanta's hands, and then they turn to go to leave. And Meleager is like, excuse me. I don't fucking think so. See, while you guys were standing back with your thumbs up your ass, I was the one who killed the boar, and I wouldn't have been able to kill the boar if it wasn't for that first arrow that Atalanta landed. So don't try to steal my glory, and especially do not try and steal hers. And do not belittle her when she is more of a warrior than you will ever be. And Plexippus turns to say something stupid, I'm sure, to Meleager, and finds himself standing face to face with a spear. And without another word, Meleager kills his uncle. Toxius is in shock and has a moment where he's like, I should probably say something or like avenge my brother. But at the same time, Meleager's a little scared right now and he's out for blood. So I think I'm just going to like run away and we'll finish this some other time. And as he turns to leave to try and flee, he doesn't get very far and Meleager cuts him down as well. Back in Calydon, the news has reached Althea about her son's victory, and she's gathering like gifts and all the offerings to the gods to bring to their altar. And when she hears that her brothers have been killed, she just is beside herself with grief. She beats at her chest and she cries out, asking what happened. Was it the ball? Were they a victim of Artemis's fury? And she's told, no, Meleager killed them in seemingly cold blood fired by the rage of Ares. And Althea's grief then turns to rage itself. So she goes to the secret place in the palace, fetches the log, and builds a fire. She thinks of her brothers, turns her back to the fire so she doesn't see exactly what she's about to do, and tosses the log over her shoulder. The log groans in the fireplace, and miles away, Meleager starts to groan as well. Meleager starts to feel hot. He has no idea what's happening. He doesn't know what his mother has just done in revenge for her brothers. His mouth grows dry. He is so thirsty. The heat is unrelenting. It starts hurting. He's a warrior. He's been in pain before. He knows his courage can get him through, but the pain keeps spreading and the heat is unyielding. He's not sure what's coming over him, but as he weakens and falls to the ground, he laments that this is how he meets his end, so bloodless. He is a warrior. He is an argonaut. He is killer of the Calydonian bull, and this is not a warrior's death. Even Ancaeus, disemboweled through his balls, had a better death than this, and he cannot believe that this is how he reaches his end. And as the log turns to embers and then ash, Meleager takes his last breath. Now it's said that the entirety of Calydon mourned him. Commoners and nobles, young and old, men and women, all cry for Meleager. Althea hears the cries of the town and she kills herself. Meleager's father, Enos, tears out his hair and exclaims that his life is cursed and Artemis is avenged and content. So don't piss her off, like, ever. And while this is happening, Atalanta saw the whole thing. Meleager most likely died standing before her. He may have even fallen into her arms, and Atalanta was done being a warrior. So she went back home, and word of her exploits and successes have traveled across all of Greece. Her father, who was so quick to just fucking abandon her in a mountainside as a newborn, welcomes her home with open arms because she has brought such honor to his name with absolutely no fucking thanks to him. Atalanta, she just wants to live a quiet life, and her father tells her that she is more than welcome to if she gets married. Atalanta is like, fuck no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to get married. And her father is like, well, you don't have a choice. So real good time to start actually being like a dad now that she's grown and not, you know, she was a child and actually needed her father. So anyway, she makes a bargain with him that she will marry if someone can beat her in a race. It's said that she's the fastest woman in the world, so let's put it to the test. If they win, they can marry me. If I win, I get to kill them. And her father's like, okay, yeah, that's fair. Okay, sure, let's do that. And a slew of men who, like, obviously only think with their dicks just line up to race her. They all thought that they could beat her. She's just a woman. These are men. They doubted her and her abilities, and they all died for it. A man named Hippomenes came one day just to witness everything that was happening. He actually thought with the head that was on his shoulders and was like, what kind of stupid motherfucker could possibly risk his life for a woman? There are a ton of women. Like half of the population are women. Like, this one sounds pretty cool. I'm going to give it to you. But I'm good. And then Atalanta walked onto the field. And she shed her overclothes, and Hippomenes took in her, quote, splendid form, as Ovid so nicely says, and is like, oh shit. Okay. Yeah, no, I see it. I understand. Sign me up. I'm in. I would like that. Yes, please. I would let her do anything to me. She could kill me and I would probably enjoy it, which, I mean, very well may happen if I lose this race. He fell in love with her at first sight, and Atalanta, as she readied herself for the day's races, caught him in the corner of her eye, and she seemed to feel a little flutter, a little butterfly in her stomach. But then the race begins. She takes off. Hippomenes watches in awe as her feet are like wings. Her hair flows freely behind her, and there are little white ribbons at her knees that flutter in the wind as she runs. She easily outpaces all the men who are trying to win her hand, and then they all die by her hand. And then Hippomenes shoots his shot. He walks over to her and is like, well, of course you won. I mean, did you see those guys? Like, I'm not going to speak ill of the dead. Nice technique with the murdering, by the way, but why seek such easy victories? You should race me one-on-one. You know, my great-grandfather is Poseidon. Think of the glory you'll receive if you defeat someone descended from a god. You're as fast as the wind, Atalanta, but I'm as swift as the seas. And Atalanta is used to men. She's fought by their side. She's participated in and listened to their conversation. She knows how they work and the things that they say to try and get what they want from women. And yet, this man seems different. Did she really want to win this race? She thinks to herself, is there some cruel god who has cursed this boy, who has sent him here to essentially commit suicide? He's young, but he's bold and fearless, and I can see the God in him as he stands before me. And I'm not worth it. I'm not worth bringing about his death. Just leave while you can, Hippomenes. Surely you'll find someone else worthy of you. But even as she thought that, she felt a tinge of jealousy almost at the thought of him marrying someone else, and that if she had to marry someone, it would be him. But the oracle all those years ago told her never to marry, told her that if she were to marry, that she would lose herself. She saw what happened firsthand when Medea lost herself, and life is so fleeting. I mean, if the encounter with Meleager taught her anything, it's that love can literally kill you. So she went to tell Hippomenes that she wouldn't race him, deny him his trial, but he said it in front of everyone, and now they're all calling for this race to happen. And Hippomenes talked a big game, but he was scared shitless. So he began praying to Aphrodite to help him. It was a gentle plea. It wasn't boastful or demanding, just the plea of a lover who wishes to be with the person that he loves. And Aphrodite just so happened to be walking by. She just so happened to have just left the Hesperides, which are the field of golden apples. She just so happened to have 3 of them in her arms, and she just so happened to decide to let love win today. Also didn't help that Atalanta was a devotee of Artemis and rejected love, and Aphrodite saw some sick humor in it, having been denied by Atalanta for so long. So Aphrodite went over to Hippomenes. She disguised herself. She handed him the apples and instructed him how to use them as trumpets began blaring and signaling the start of the race. So a trumpet sounds and the race begins. Atalanta takes off running. She easily outpaces Hippomenes, and it looks like she will be victorious yet again. But it's weird. It isn't like the other races. She's not going as hard. And more than once, she's about to pass him, and she slows slightly and steals a glance at his face. And is that reluctance? And that's when Hippomenes drops the first apple. He tosses it in front of her. Atalanta's like, "Ooh, shiny," and stops to pick it up. Although there might be some other reason why she stops. Atalanta isn't dumb, but the pause is enough for Hippomenes to take the lead. So Atalanta pockets the golden fruit and takes off again. She catches up and starts to overtake Hippomenes yet again when he throws the second apple. And this time, it's a little bit more off the path. Atalanta sees it and again goes to retrieve it and then catches back up. The finish line is now in sight, and Hippomenes lets out a silent plea to Aphrodite. "Goddess, please be with me now. Stand beside me and guide my apple, which is the first draft of the Guide My Sword scene from The Princess Bride. He throws the apple. This one lands even farther off the path. Atalanta sees it and she hesitates. She could just leave it. She could let that golden apple stay there. She should let that golden apple stay there. But she ran from what happened with Medea. And she ran from love with Meleager. And I think that she was just tired of running. So she stopped, she picked up the apple and looked up as Hippomenes crossed the finish line. It was done. He had won, and she was going to lose herself. But she didn't really mourn for what she would lose. Now, in most versions that I have read or heard of Atalanta, her story ends with her and Hippomenes walking along together, and Aphrodite becomes enraged at them because Hippomenes never offered thanks to her for what she did and how she stepped in to get him his prized bride. So they're walking along together, and as they're passing a temple of Rhea, she makes them overcome with desire, and they seek shelter in the temple. And as the Sims would say, they woohoo, you know? And Rhea sees this and she becomes enraged at this insult. And in the throes of their passion, while they're fucking like animals, she turns them into fucking animals, like lions, to be more specific. In some version of the myths, it's Artemis who turns them into lions because she's mad at Atalanta for losing her virginity. There are some people who say that the reason that it was the lions is because there may have been this belief at the time that lions couldn't mate with other lions. They could only mate with jaguars. And so turning them into lions would mean that they could never be together again. But I read one theory that was by Adrienne Mayer, who said that there's literally no evidence of that belief. And what she thinks is that they were turned into lions because female lions are the hunters. And Greece, as misogynistic as it was, would never have accepted their relationship as it was. And they would have tried to suppress her and kill her spirit. And in the transformation into a lion, they could hunt and they could mate and they could be together as they truly were outside of Greek society. So like in a way, yes, she lost herself, but in a way, that was the only way that she could truly be herself. Which is like kind of a happy ending in a fucked up way, I guess. But when I was researching, I found another ending to her story that is not as happy of an ending, and I haven't heard anyone discuss this really. Not that it isn't out there somewhere, I'm sure, but I think I'm going to end it on a little bit of a cliffhanger this week, and we're going to save that last story for next week. So thank you so much for listening today. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, please consider subscribing or leaving a review or joining my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, you will have access to next week's episode immediately. You can go listen to it right now. If you have any stories from history or mythology that you would like to hear me discuss, please reach out because I'm always looking for new ideas. And I will see you next week with part 2 of Atalanta. But until then, remember, history may be watching you, so don't fuck it up, or you may be turned into a lion. Bye!